The man who bought a small burger stand and changed the world forever. What if I told you that one of the richest businessmen in American history spent decades feeling like a complete failure? Not because he lacked talent, not because he didn't work hard, but because success kept arriving just out of reach. Imagine waking up every morning in your 50s, watching younger people become millionaires while you were still driving from town to town selling paper cups, wondering if your biggest dream had already died. Most people would have given up. Most people would have accepted an ordinary life. But one man refused. He made one decision that everyone around him thought was crazy. That single decision didn't just change his life, it changed the way billions of people eat. Today, his name is remembered around the world. But almost nobody knows how many years of rejection, failure, debt, embarrassment, and loneliness came before his success. This isn't just the story of building a business. It's the story of believing in yourself when the entire world has already believed in you. If you've ever felt like you're running out of time, if you've ever looked at someone younger than you and wondered, why not me? Stay until the end, because the lesson Ray Kroc learned might completely change the way you think about success. This is the unbelievable story of Ray Kroc.
Long before people connected Ray Kroc's name with golden arches, he was simply another ordinary American trying to survive. There was nothing glamorous about his life, no luxury, no fame, no headlines, just bills waiting to be paid. Ray wasn't born into wealth. He wasn't a business genius as a child. He didn't invent some revolutionary product in his 20s. In fact, by the time many entrepreneurs today are already selling companies for millions, Ray Kroc was still searching for something that would finally work. He tried one job after another. Sometimes he sold paper cups. Sometimes he worked as a salesman. Every new opportunity felt like it could be the one. Every disappointment reminded him it wasn't. Years passed. Friends became successful. Other people built families, businesses, and fortunes. Ray kept moving, kept selling, kept hoping. But hope becomes heavier every year when results don't come. Imagine reaching your 50s, looking back and realizing you've spent most of your life chasing opportunities without ever catching one. Many people would call that failure. Ray Kroc called it preparation. He didn't know it yet, but every difficult customer, every sales trip, every rejection, every lonely mile on the highway was quietly preparing him for the opportunity that would finally change everything. And that opportunity would arrive from the most unexpected place imaginable. Not New York, not Hollywood, not Wall Street, but a tiny hamburger restaurant that almost nobody had ever heard of.
The year was 1954. Ray Kroc was 52 years old. Think about that for a moment. 52. Many people today believe if they haven't made it by 30, they're already too late. Ray wasn't 30. He wasn't 40. He was 52, still driving across America, still selling milkshake machines, still trying to convince restaurant owners to buy just one more machine. It wasn't the glamorous life people dreamed about. Every day meant another highway, another motel, another sales pitch, another rejection. But then, something happened that made him stop his car. A tiny restaurant in California had ordered not one, not two, but 8 multi-mixers at the same time. Ray couldn't believe it. 8 machines? Why would one small burger stand need 8 milkshake mixers? Was it a mistake? Was someone playing a joke? Or did they know something that everyone else had missed? Most salesmen would have simply shipped the order and moved on. Ray Kroc wasn't like most salesmen. His curiosity refused to let it go. So instead of making another phone call, he got into his car and drove thousands of miles to see the restaurant with his own eyes. He had absolutely no idea that this road trip would become one of the most important journeys in business history.
The first time he saw it. When Ray finally arrived, he expected another ordinary hamburger restaurant. Instead, he saw something unbelievable. There was no chaos, no long waits, no confused employees shouting orders. Customers walked up to the window, ordered their food, and within seconds, their burgers, fries, and milkshakes were already waiting. Everything moved with military precision. The kitchen looked almost like a factory. Every employee knew exactly where to stand, exactly what to do, exactly how long each step should take. No wasted movement, no wasted time. Ray stood there, watching silently. The more he watched, the more excited he became. People kept coming. Families, teenagers, workers on lunch breaks. Cars filled the parking lot. Customers smiled because they received hot food incredibly fast. And then another customer arrived. Then another. Then another. Ray wasn't just watching a restaurant anymore. He was watching a system that could work anywhere, a system that didn't depend on one talented chef, a system that ordinary people could repeat again and again and again. That idea hit him like lightning. Most people saw a successful hamburger stand. Ray Kroc saw the future. Meeting the McDonald brothers. The owners were two quiet brothers, Richard and Maurice McDonald. They were friendly, humble, hard-working. They weren't chasing fame. They simply wanted a comfortable life. They proudly showed Ray every detail of their operation, how every burger was cooked exactly the same way, how every order followed the same process, how every customer received the same quality every single time. Ray listened carefully. He asked questions, lots of questions. Inside his mind, ideas were exploding. What if there were 10 restaurants like this? What if there were 100? What if every American family could experience this? The brothers smiled. To them, one successful restaurant was enough. To Ray, one restaurant was only the beginning. At that moment, two completely different visions stood face to face. The brothers wanted stability. Ray Kroc wanted a revolution. And that difference would soon change everything. The decision nobody believed in. On the drive back, Ray couldn't stop thinking. He barely slept. He replayed every detail in his mind, every customer, every burger, every perfectly organized employee. He wasn't dreaming about selling milkshake machines anymore. He was dreaming about something much bigger. But there was one problem. He almost had no money. He wasn't young. He wasn't famous. He didn't have powerful investors waiting to help him. He only had one thing, an unshakable belief that this little hamburger stand could become the biggest restaurant brand in America. Everyone else thought he was chasing another impossible dream, but Ray had already made his mind. Sometimes the biggest opportunities don't look big at all. Sometimes they look like a tiny restaurant on the side of the road, and only one person can see the empire hidden inside it. Ray Kroc couldn't sleep. Every night the same picture filled his mind. The busy little restaurant, the smiling customers, the speed, the system,
the possibility. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. If this restaurant could succeed in one small town, it could succeed across America. But believing in an idea and building it are two completely different battles. A few weeks later, Ray returned to California. This time not as a salesman, but as a man chasing the biggest opportunity of his life. He sat down with Richard and Maurice McDonald. For hours they talked about business, about quality, about customers, about the future. Finally, Ray asked the question that had been burning inside him. What if we opened restaurants like this across America? The brothers looked at each other. They had heard similar ideas before. Most had failed. They weren't interested in building an empire. They simply wanted a peaceful life. Running one successful restaurant was enough for them. But Ray wouldn't let the idea die. He explained everything, city after city, state after state, the same menu, the same quality, the same customer experience. Thousands of restaurants, all carrying the same name. The brothers hesitated. It sounded exciting, but also dangerous. After long discussions, they finally agreed to give Ray a chance. It wasn't ownership, it wasn't control, it was simply permission to help expand the business. For Ray, that was enough. He walked out of the meeting smiling. He believed his future had finally begun. But he had no idea the hardest years of his life were still ahead. Ray Kroc couldn't sleep. Every night the same picture filled his mind. The busy little restaurant, the smiling customers, the speed, the system, the possibility. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. If this restaurant could succeed in one small town, it could succeed across America. But believing in an idea and building it are two completely different battles. A few weeks later, Ray returned to California. This time not as a salesman, but as a man chasing the biggest opportunity of his life. He sat down with Richard and Maurice McDonald. For hours they talked about business, about quality, about customers, about the future. Finally, Ray asked the question that had been burning inside him. What if we opened restaurants like this across America? The brothers looked at each other. They had heard similar ideas before. Most had failed. They weren't interested in building an empire. They simply wanted a peaceful life. Running one successful restaurant was enough for them. But Ray wouldn't let the idea die. He explained everything, city after city, state after state, the same menu, the same quality, the same customer experience. Thousands of restaurants, all carrying the same name. The brothers hesitated. It sounded exciting, but also dangerous. After long discussions, they finally agreed to give Ray a chance. It wasn't ownership, it wasn't control, it was simply permission to help expand the business. For Ray, that was enough. He walked out of the meeting smiling. He believed his future had finally begun. But he had no idea the hardest years of his life were still ahead.
Starting from almost nothing. People often imagine that success begins with millions of dollars. Ray had nothing like that. No huge investors, no giant bank account, no powerful corporation standing behind him. He was a 52-year-old salesman carrying a dream that most people couldn't even understand. He borrowed money. He convinced people to trust him. He traveled constantly. He worked longer hours than ever before. Every dollar mattered. Sometimes he wondered how he would pay next month's bills. Yet every morning, he kept moving. Because dreams don't grow through comfort. They grow through persistence. The first franchises.
Ray found people willing to open new restaurants. He promised them opportunity. He promised them a proven system. But reality hit hard. Some franchise owners ignored the rules. Some wanted larger menus. Others cut corners to save money. Cheap ingredients, poor service, dirty kitchens. Ray was furious. He understood something that many business owners never learned. A brand is built on trust. One bad restaurant could damage every good one. So he made a painful decision. He became incredibly strict. Every burger had to taste the same. Every order had to be fast. Every restaurant had to follow the system. Some owners hated him. Some quit. Some called him impossible to work with. Ray didn't care. He wasn't building restaurants. He was building a reputation.
The money problem. There was another crisis, one that nearly ended everything. The restaurants were growing, customers loved them, but Ray himself was barely making any money. Can you imagine that? The business appeared successful. People assumed Ray was becoming rich. In reality, he was drowning in financial pressure. Loans, bills, stress, sleepless nights. At times, he questioned whether he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. His friends couldn't understand why he refused to quit. "You've worked hard enough. You're getting older. Why keep risking everything?" Those words would have convinced most people. But Ray had learned something during decades of failure. The world often tells you to stop right before your breakthrough arrives. So instead of quitting, he doubled down. He searched for a solution that no one else could see. And that single solution would soon transform a struggling businessman into one of the most powerful entrepreneurs in American history. But first, he would have to survive one final storm.
Ray Kroc had reached a breaking point. The restaurants were growing. Customers loved the food. The McDonald's name was becoming more recognizable every month. Yet somehow, Ray himself was still struggling financially. It didn't make sense. He had spent years building the business. He worked longer than anyone else. He carried the risk, but the profits were barely enough to keep moving. For the first time, even Ray wondered, have I come all this way just to fail again? Then one meeting changed everything. During a conversation with business advisor Harry Sonborn, Ray heard an idea so simple yet so powerful that it would completely transform the future of McDonald's. Harry said, "Ray, you're not really in the hamburger business." Ray looked confused. "You're in the real estate business." At first, those words sounded ridiculous. Real estate? What did land have to do with burgers? But as Harry explained the strategy, Ray's eyes widened. Instead of simply collecting small franchise fees, the company could buy or control the land where each restaurant was built, then lease that property to franchise owners. That meant steady income, more control, and unlimited expansion. It was brilliant. Ray knew immediately this was the missing piece. From that day forward, everything changed. New restaurants opened faster than ever. The system became stronger. Investors gained confidence. The company exploded across America. One city became 10. 10 became 100. 100 became 1,000. Soon, the Golden Arches weren't just a restaurant. They became a symbol recognized around the world. Millions of families visited every year. Millions of jobs were created. What had once been a tiny burger stand had become one of the most recognizable brands on earth. But success brought another difficult chapter. As McDonald's expanded, Ray and the McDonald brothers disagreed more and more about the future. The brothers preferred caution. Ray believed the company needed bold leadership and a single vision. Eventually, Ray purchased full control of the business. It was one of the most controversial decisions of his life. Some people admired him,
Others criticized him. History still debates every detail. But one fact is undeniable. Without Ray Kroc's relentless drive, McDonald's would almost certainly never have become a global empire. Years later, the salesman who once struggled to pay his bills had become one of the most influential businessmen in history. Not because he succeeded early, not because life was easy, but because he refused to stop.
The lesson.
Ray Kroc once said, "When you're green, you're growing. When you're ripe, you rot." In other words, the moment you believe you've learned enough, the moment you stop improving, you begin to fall behind. Ray Kroc didn't become successful because he was the smartest. He became successful because he stayed curious. He kept learning, he kept adapting, and he kept moving, even when the world told him he was too old. Think about your own life. How many dreams have you abandoned simply because you believed you were too late? How many opportunities have you ignored because someone else started younger? Ray Kroc's story proves something extraordinary. Your age is not your biggest obstacle. Your past is not your biggest obstacle. Even failure is not your biggest obstacle. The biggest obstacle is believing that your story is already over. As long as you're willing to learn, to work, to adapt, and to refuse to quit, your greatest chapter may still be waiting to be written. So whether you're 20, 40, 60, or even older, remember this: it's never too late to build the life you've imagined. Because history has shown us that sometimes the people who bloom the latest leave the greatest legacy. Thank you for watching. If Ray Kroc's story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear one simple truth today. Success doesn't care how old you are. It only asks one question: will you keep going?